give us a sense of what's going on. Do they think that this investigation is going to shut down? We know President Trump is happy that Matt Whitaker is there. And even if he doesn't officially shut the Mueller investigation down, we remember when he was on CNN, he had said, well, you could always starve it. You could always choke it, give it no funding so it has to die. Yeah. Or is Team White House bracing for maximum impact here?
Yeah, Steph, my reporting is that there's no plan to shut down the investigation at any point soon, but that the president is somewhat relieved to have Whitaker, an ally, technically overseeing all of it, because he can feel a little bit more control over an investigation that he has really had zero control over until now. But there's no effort, as far as I'm aware, to be shutting it down immediately. But it's important to keep in mind that the president is feeling a lot of other pressures. He spent this week with his lawyers trying to answer those questions to Robert Mueller's team. So he's dealing with his own side of the investigation, which is separate from what's going on with Julian Assange overnight. And then he's also grappling with the idea of the Democrats taking over in the House and the majority there and all the investigations they're going to be launching, the subpoenas they may be filing, and feeling the heat. And so the mood is quite dour this week over in the West Wing.
Well, the president does like to talk his own book. He doesn't like to answer questions. And whether it's going to be questions from Democrats or Robert Mueller, he doesn't want to answer them. All right, Danny, let's walk through all that's happened in the last week, because not only are we getting word of these possible charges against Julian Assange, let's walk through what has happened in the last 7 days. Jerome Corsi has been questioned about WikiLeaks. He said he expects to be indicted. The Wall Street Journal said Roger Stone, he is under investigation for witness intimidation, and he has also said he expects to be indicted, and court filings indicate Mueller's team is still working with Rick Gates and Paul Manafort. Does all of this give you an idea of where this investigation stands?
It's not a surprise that the government's still working with Gates and Manafort, because cooperation in a case as big and as far-reaching as this takes months, sometimes up to a year or more if needed. Not only do they have to vet or get all the information they can from these folks, they have to vet it carefully, because most often cooperating witnesses are already convicted liars. So on that end, they have to be cautious. The other potential defendants, remember, if you just meet with these agents and lie to them, that's Section 1001. That's false statement. So that sounds consistent with what we've seen in the past in this prosecution.
But think about how big this Mueller investigation is. At the end of the day, if the only thing they go after people for is perjury and witness intimidation, is that really a win for Mueller?
I think that's deeply concerning, and other people have voiced that observation, that if at the end all of these false statements charges necessarily did not exist and are a consequence of the Mueller investigation,
yeah, I mean,
right?
Louise Ruhle could tell you if she met Roger Stone for a minute, witness intimidation was going to be on the list for him. But that's not, why Roger Stone was originally pulled into all this.
And that's right. And I think that's the challenge, politically speaking, for the Mueller investigation, is that if at the end all they have is a bunch of false statements, that could be a concern. However, I think you could also read into the fact that you have these false statements charges, and then these are witnesses that are made to cooperate, that there must be some there, or else we would hope that the U.S. attorneys and the Mueller team would decide that, hey, our job here is done, and they would have done so a long time ago.
I don't know. I guess there's a big difference between sleazy losers and liars and big-time criminals. Elise, what do you make of the word that the Trump White House is talking about replacing Whitaker? Do you even believe this? Days ago, they were defending him hardcore. The fact that they're floating out, well, we're working on somebody new. Do you believe it, or are they just trying to distract us?
I think that the Trump White House, the adults, if there are any left at the Trump White House, are under a lot of pressure.
But for real, who is that?
Everyone but Donald Trump. Donald Trump probably wants to keep Whitaker. Otherwise, this White House is under a lot of pressure from conservative allies to put someone in the position who is seen as a legitimate pick for Attorney General, and who is seen as someone who is going to uphold the rule of law and not serve as Donald Trump's personal attorney at the Justice Department. You've had Republican senators speaking out about this, and just this week at the Federalist Society, you've seen a trifecta of very prominent conservative lawyers who are speaking out out against what they see as the degradation of rule of law in the Donald Trump era. That's pretty big. And so they are under pressure to replace and put in someone who is seen as a legitimate choice.
Do you agree with that, Bill? I mentioned it earlier. Bill Cornyn said replacing John Cornyn would, quote, relieve a lot of the controversy, right? For months, we have been saying, where are Republicans? Where are Republicans? Is even a hint of this, that they're not getting in line behind him and Whitaker, giving you the sense that maybe they're done just completely being in lockstep with President Trump?
Well,
Yeah, I think that.
Sorry, I'm going to Bill. So, Phil, hold on one second. I'm going to Bill Cohan.
Look, I think you're beginning, maybe, you saw a little bit maybe with this Jeff Flake, who's obviously leaving the Senate, gambit to say he's not going to vote for any more federal judges until this Mueller safety bill is put in place. Look, to me, this Whitaker thing is another example of a self-inflicted wound from this administration. Why even choose this guy? Nobody even knows who the guy is. He was, what, chief of staff for the Attorney General?
People from the masculine toilet company know who he is.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure people from the FBI who've been investigating these companies involved with.
Yes,
they're familiar.
But how about like in the law enforcement circles, in judiciary circles? I mean, he was chief of staff to the Attorney General. Why not pick Rosenstein, at least for a little while? Why not do something sensible? But this, to me, was another self-inflicted wound. If, in fact, they're trying to find somebody new who's legitimate, okay, that sounds like a good, positive step forward.
All right, Mr. Rucker, we know that the Trump team has been working on Robert Mueller's Russia questions, written questions. To what degree does this investigation impact President Trump on a day-to-day basis? Is he spending hours with Rudy Giuliani and others working on these answers? I mean, I'm guessing if that's the case, that would contribute to why he's been so sour.
Yeah, Steph, I mean, this week, certainly he has spent a number of hours with his legal team going over those answers, but also just stewing over the state of the investigation. And we've seen that clearly in the tweets of this week. He had a bit of a reprieve, President Trump did, in the run-up to the midterm elections. There was not a lot of talk on cable news, which he watches all the time, about the Russia investigation. His team had sort of been on pause in terms of dealing with the Russia investigation as the president was on the campaign trail, and therefore he was, focused on other issues and happy about that. Now he's come back to Washington to the cold, hard reality that this investigation is ongoing, that it's heating up on him, and that he is due to provide these answers to Mueller's team, and he's clearly having a difficult time navigating all of that this week, and that's why we've seen these outbursts on Twitter.
Well, he brought the rain in France home with him. He came home to torrential downpour. All right, Danny, I do want to go back to Julian Assange for a moment. The issue, the accidental revealing of possible charges, and it comes as no surprise, Assange's lawyer would make a statement, and he said this, quote, "The only thing more irresponsible than charging a person for publishing truthful information would be to put in a public filing information that clearly was not intended for the public, and without any notice to Mr. Assange, the notion that the federal criminal charges could be brought based on the publication of truthful information is an incredibly dangerous precedent to set." Let's just make something clear. WikiLeaks chose to dump information. Whether it was a stupid move or a sloppy move or not, it was an accident. What happened here?
It was an accident. What happened here in terms of WikiLeaks dumping the information? No, not at all. Okay.
No, in terms of a filing coming out with Julian Assange's name still on it.
My heart felt a pang of sympathy for this assistant U.S. attorney who must have done. He violated the rules of e-filing, which is woe be unto the attorney who does not proofread his filing before he e-files it or electronically files it. He or she. I
appreciate that you assume the mistake could be made by a dude.
Of course. I believe I read the name attached to it. I believe it was a man.
Let's just assume that anyway.
So, and the other thing is, cut and paste at your own peril. We attorneys, when we electronically file, we file a lot of run-of-the-mill humdrum documents. And a lot of times we turn to another lawyer and say, hey, can I borrow your motion to seal? I just need to cut and paste. If that's what happened here, the thing that jumps out at me is wouldn't you avoid using a cut and paste original document from the Assange case? Wouldn't you just use Joe Schmo's case from down, from that nobody cares about? I wouldn't even want to play with any of those motions as a template because they could contain incredibly sensitive information. I don't know that that's what happened. But if this was a cut and paste error, it happens a lot with e-filing. A lot of these e-filing documents, you work all night on the Word document, you upload it to electronic case filing. Maybe you proofread it, maybe you didn't. I felt a pang of sympathy. I really did.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.